5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome back to Presidents in Politics. I am one of your hosts, Professor Caleb McGee, joined by fellow co-host,
Good morning.
Former Congressman Ross, and we're talking about Andrew Johnson.
Probably the most maligned president that we've had. I mean, say what you want about present-day presidents, but if you look back at Andrew Johnson, this was an amazing situation where you have him even become vice president.
Yes.
Let alone become anybody. I mean, here's a guy whose father died.
Comes from nothing.
Comes from absolutely nothing. Self-educated. Really no great skills, but other than as an orator. He had his wife teach him to read and
In his
write.
20s, more than likely.
Yes. And he was a tailor.
Yeah.
You know, he just loved to sew. That's what he did.
And like you said, his father died at the age of 3, and we're not really entirely sure of the story. So the prevailing story is that his father jumps into icy cold water to save someone's life. His father's got this kind of hero, thing going on, but then he contracts some type of pneumonia, something happens, and then he'll die when Andrew Johnson is 3 years old. He has another brother, so now they're in rural North Carolina. Just poor backwoods North Carolina. Right. So his mother actually binds Johnson, Andrew, and his brother to be indentured servants to work for a tailor. It's where they pick up the skill of learning how to sew and work with their hands. Johnson hates working for this man and actually flees, runs down to South Carolina. There's actually like a small bounty put on his head. I think it's like $10 to bring him back. And Johnson, Andrew, and his brother will stay hidden in South Carolina until the guy that they were legally bound to retires. Andrew's around the age of 17 at this point. Comes back and he picks up his mom and his new stepdad, and they move to Tennessee, and he's known as a man of Tennessee.
Yep. In fact, I think he was elected as an alderman there.
Yes.
In Greenville, Tennessee, and then later became mayor.
And he'll never lose an election, by the way.
Until after.
Yes, until after. But from his town alderman all the way up to president, that whole first streak.
Yeah. And he's a guy that really played the political ladder very well.
Yes.
Again, not well educated.
None. No formal education.
Becomes mayor, serves in the legislature of the state of Tennessee, and then gets elected to the House of Representatives, and then gets elected to the U.S. Senate at a time when Lincoln was president.
And the entire House, both the entire Congress, both House and Senate, are kind of in an uproar because you have this idea of them attempting to check the power of Lincoln, because Lincoln is this masterful mind. I mean, last week was so much fun. We could just do another several on Lincoln, but Lincoln was, how can I say this, autocratic at times.
Oh yeah, he suspended habeas corpus. I mean, he did things that today would just be unthought of.
Yes, he was autocratic at times. And so the legislative branch, reactionary to that, begins to check the power of the president.
Correct.
And then it kind of sets up a really, really hard Congress for Johnson to work with, which is, the 39th Congress, I want to say, something
Could
like
have
that.
Yeah.
And then this is where, of course, you get the Tenure of Office Act of 1867, which will bite him in the rear, as we'll come to. But a lot of these, which were really unconstitutional on the legislative side. The legislative side overreaches, but I think a lot of that was reactionary because of Lincoln.
Oh, I think you're right, and let's just go back to here he is, a United States senator at the time of Tennessee seceding from the Union at the time of the Civil War, and he is the only Southern U.S. senator who says, I'm not leaving. I will stay in D.C. as a senator from the state of Tennessee. I want to keep the Union together. But it was also his belief that the Constitution allowed for slavery. Yes. And he was also known to be a constitutionalist. I think Harry Truman said nobody knew the Constitution better than him, which really surprises me because there's nothing in the Constitution that would either condone or otherwise support slavery.
And he's completely untrained and doesn't learn how to read until he's in his 20s with no law experience. So
exactly,
Truman was overreaching on that one.
I think you're absolutely right. But he, because of his loyalty to the Union as a Southern Democrat, Lincoln makes him the territorial governor.
Yes.
Or the military governor.
The military governor of
which
Tennessee. He goes from zero military experience, like none, and I believe his rank is like brigadier general.
Yeah.
As a military.
It's
you
amazing.
talk about skipping some ranks.
Yes.
You go from zero military experience, now you're a brigadier general and a military commander over the state of Tennessee.
Yes. So he resigns his Senate seat. And it's interesting because in the re-election of Abraham Lincoln, they choose a Democrat because he's a war Democrat, and therefore we want to broaden the ticket. We want to show that
balancing the ticket.
Yes. So he comes in, and of course Lincoln overwhelmingly beats McClellan for re-election, and then there's this suggestion that Andrew Johnson was a drunk because when he was giving his inaugural speech in order to address a typhoid fever that he apparently had, he imbibed too much
several shots of whiskey before going to the Senate floor.
And he embarrassed himself and others, slurring his words, and therefore he got the label of being a drunkard. So he didn't start out too well, and then 5 weeks later he becomes president of the United States, which is just amazing. I don't think he was ready for that role under any circumstance.
No, absolutely not.
I think that he enjoyed the political process. I think that it was the authority that he didn't want to have, but all of a sudden he's thrust with that authority, and he's dealing with a very Republican Congress. And they think at first that, he's going to support what Lincoln had been doing and everything's going to be fine. And he kind of does support what Lincoln, he wants to give reconciliation to the South. But then he starts his battles with the Republican Congress.
Yes.
And, he vetoes the Freedmen's Bureau. He vetoes the...
which was to give every freed slave 40 acres, a mule, and seed, basically. So it was, in a way, offering this idea of back pay, of restitution.
Yeah, reparations, essentially.
Reparations. But that would have been done correctly at the right time for the right individuals, of saying, okay, you've worked for literally nothing, you are enslaved, let's give you land, and that could be generational. And had that been done correctly at that time period, I think it would have addressed a lot of the issues we see today. Some of the more radical things, what is San Francisco, of some of the reparations that are being offered in San Francisco that are just very, 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 very far left. But some of that is reactionary to that. I mean, had this been taken care of and nipped in the bud, and every slave that was free was given land and livestock and seed to say, okay, we're going to make things right, and now this is your generational land, you can pass down to the next generations, all of the issues we're dealing with today, I don't think would have been on the table.
I agree. And in his leniency to the Southerners, I think in fighting the Congress, not only did he veto that, he vetoed the Civil Rights Act. He did not believe in suffrage for blacks.
No.
Which was really amazing. And they had these black codes
the Jim Crow laws, basically.
And there was one, I think it was in Mississippi, I think it was in several states as well, where if a Negro did not have a job, they were deemed to be a vagrant and could be fined up to $150. That if they couldn't pay, they could be imprisoned until such time they worked off that debt, which is essentially
legalizing slavery.
Exactly.
Is all that was.
And because of that because of his lack of cooperation, or at least consensus building with Congress, it delayed an effective Reconstruction.
Yes.
And a transition to where we would have avoided probably a lot more. And in fact, if it wasn't for the 14th Amendment, which he objected to.
Yes, he did.
We probably would have had an even worse situation.
I believe that because of his, can we use the term ignorance, in the way that he handled this in the South, he then gave rise, because it was linked to two parties like the KKK, which were terrorist organizations.
Yes,
which
domestic terrorism.
They were domestic terrorism. It still is. It's domestic terrorism. And these individuals were left over as officers and soldiers from the Confederacy, and now they begin disguising themselves and carrying out guerrilla justice upon these freed slaves. And one of the reasons that he did not want black suffrage, there's only 30 million people in the country. Now you have 4 million freed slaves. So he was terrified of having these 4 million freed black individuals who are going to vote Republican, and he realizes from his background as a Democratic candidate that
he was a
basically
Jacksonian Democrat.
Yes.
I mean, that's basically where you got to start.
And he feels that the Democrats will never have a chance to win ever again, because you just picked up 12%? You picked up a 12% voting rate is for them. So this is one of the reasons why the South does everything they can with poll tax and Jim Crow laws. Let's keep these individuals from voting, because they're going to vote our entire organization, the Democratic Party, our caucus, out of extinction. We'll go the way of the Whigs and the Free Soil and the anti-Masonic and whatever other party died out. They are afraid the Democratic Party will die out because of this.
And you see what ensues thereafter. And then, of course, when he gets upset, what was it, 1866, he gets upset at Congress, so he goes and makes his pitch of stump speeches, rabble-rousing, against the Republican Congress. I think he calls it the swing around the circle.
Yes.
And as a result of that, it becomes an embarrassment to him, and they get a two-thirds majority. The Republicans get a two-thirds majority in Congress, so they've got a solid control on him, and now retribution sell ensue. Almost
impeaching because of it,
and they do, and they under, as you said, the Tenure of Office Act.
Yes.
Which the Tenure of Office Act basically said that the Senate, because they on the recommendation of the president and the advice and consent of the Senate appoints these cabinet positions, that the Senate has to approve any removal of officers.
right.
And I think it was Secretary of State Stanton,
Edward Stanton.
yeah, that didn't get along
Secretary
with
of War.
Secretary of War.
Secretary of War Edward Stanton.
Who didn't get along with Johnson. So Johnson removes him in violation of the Tenure of Office Act, and they say, there's a violation. We are going after you. And they give him, 11 counts of impeachment, and thus begins the first impeachment in the United States.
Yeah, and they replace Johnson is clever. He's not educated at all, but he's clever. He's very keen. Johnson replaces Stanton with Grant.
Yes.
But Grant is too keen as well. He's too intelligent to realize what's going to happen. So
he realizes that it could affect his president run.
Yes. Yeah. So then the Congress orders him to step down. So what he does is he doesn't want to necessarily give the keys to the office over to his successor, so he goes to the War Office and basically lays him on the desk and just leaves without telling Johnson. So Andrew Johnson now feels like he's been stabbed in the back by Grant. Grant didn't even like Johnson. So the whole thing is just this. We talk political drama in today's time. There's nothing new about that.
And not only is there nothing amazing, new about it, but impeachment was being used as a political tool,
of a retribution tool.
Of a retribution tool.
Yes.
Hence today. Which is totally contrary of the high crimes and
high crimes and misdemeanors. And the only reason why the term high crimes are used, as you know, this time is because there are no felonies yet, because there are no federal laws of like an FBI. There are U.S. Marshals at this time period. There's not really the idea of federal teeth of a law system yet.
Right.
So we use the term high crimes and misdemeanors because they're controlled by states still.
And he goes through the impeachment, and it's really close. In fact, there's no reason that if all the Republicans vote the way they should, as Republicans should, and wrote the party line, I say that facetiously, then Johnson should be impeached.
That's right.
And he isn't.
By one senator's vote.
Senator Edmund G. Ross. No relation.
No.
Senator Ross was from Kansas. And I did some research on that, and that's what I thought was so fascinating, because he believed that what was being done was a travesty. And I think he even commented.
He does the name proud, huh? He stands for constitutional law.
Yeah, he does. He really does, and at his own detriment. I mean, he said that. In fact, John F. Kennedy put it in his book profiles in Courage, a chapter on Edmund G.
Really?
Ross.
I didn't realize that.
And I remember reading that when I was a kid, and he says, when I cast my vote, I looked down in my own. When I looked down on my open grave because of what I'd done, and he concluded that the essential ingredient of judicial fairness was not shown to Mr. Johnson. It was an ill-disguised and malevolent partisan prosecution. Championing the separation of powers, the senator defended the dignity of the chief magistrate and the presidency, constitutional rank as a coordinate department of the government. What he said, essentially, my party did not do this correctly, and it was not a fair trial. And as a result of that, Ross is not reelected. His life is put at risk. I mean, it's a terrible thing for him to have to endure. But it's not unlike today. Here's somebody who absolutely believed in the Constitution, in the rule of law, and was willing to go against his own party and put his own livelihood and life on the line
for what was right,
to do what was
simply what was right.
And the irony of this is that ultimately the Supreme Court several years later overturns the Tenure of Office Act, which of course supports Johnson, and that was the basis for the impeachment. And Ross saw this. Johnson was a victim of it, but we ultimately heal over it.
Yes.
And it isn't until nearly over 100 years later that we see impeachment used as a political tool. And
that is
unfortunately, it will probably be in every presidential term hereafter used as a political tool.
Which is just honestly sickening, and it takes away from the original framers' intent. The original framers' intent of impeachment was solely to prevent tyranny.
Correct.
here these founding fathers are coming from a system in the 1700s where every old European empire is ruled by a king, by a monarch, by a czar, by whatever term you want to use. And America was supposed to be different. We are a democratic republic, and even more republic-leaning than democratic at that time period. So we're going to stay away from this. So the impeachment process was given to the legislative branch to keep a King George III from rising again.
Absolutely.
That was the only reason. It was never to be political retribution. It was never to make headlines. It was never to tarnish a presidency. It was solely to prevent a tyrant from raising to power. Now, for those of our listeners who don't realize this, impeachment is a two-step process.
Correct.
And of course, I mean, you've been in the House. You understand this. The House impeaches, and then the Senate has to convict. Yeah. The Senate has to convict with a supermajority, two-thirds majority. So we've had 3 presidents who have been impeached. Trump was impeached twice. He's the only president who's been impeached twice. However, we've never had a president who was convicted by the Senate. That's
Correct.
never taken place. Johnson is the closest president to ever be convicted.
One vote.
One vote, and we would have seen the process not only impeach, but then also convict. The 3 presidents who have been impeached, of course, are Johnson, Clinton, and then Trump, who's been impeached twice. Everyone always thinks Nixon was, but Nixon was smart enough to resign.
Resigned beforehand, yeah, because he knew everybody was coming after him.
The handwriting was on the wall.
Yeah.
Not only would the House have impeached him, written up the articles of impeachment, but the Senate would have convicted him.
And there were crimes here, obviously.
And there were crimes. I mean, Chuck Colson was the fall guy, right?
Yeah, you're right. And Haldeman and all those.
Yes.
But when you look back at Johnson and you think, here's a guy that probably created his own mess, who probably didn't have any close advisors. Again, like I said, probably wasn't prepared for this and really didn't want the authority.
No.
And I wouldn't say abused it. He just probably didn't use it correctly.
Agreed.
But then after he's out of office, of course he's not renominated, he continues to try to stay in politics.
Which goes disastrously.
It does. It does. I mean, here's a guy who, then runs for Congress and loses. He then runs for the U.S. Senate. Well, he runs for the U.S. Senate and loses, and Congress and loses, and then finally gets elected to the U.S. Senate, and then a few months later dies. And you just look back at the poor guy. His wife had tuberculosis and could not be a first lady.
What did they call it? Slow-moving consumption or something. Basically, it was almost like a COPD, where it just slowly kind of zapped the strength out of you. She only comes in public for 2 events. One was the coronation of some queen from one of the South Pacific Islands came to the White House, and one for Andrew Johnson's public birthday. And out of his entire tenure, there's only 2 public events she ever comes to.
That's amazing.
She's basically secluded besides that.
Wow. And you just wonder if he was, I don't know what his religious ties were. I think he was attended Methodist church.
He was all over the place religiously.
Yeah.
So I don't know, honestly. I think he's one of the few presidents who never officially joined a denomination. So I've read a lot on this about his faith. There's not a lot there. He said that his wife is devoutly Methodist. That's why he would attend Methodist. He liked the Baptist polity because the Baptists have something called the local autonomy of the church. It means that each church gets to make up their own mind. They're not under anyone. So he loved that. But at this time period in 1800s, you typically would buy or lease a pew in Protestant churches. That's the reason why DC did this for years.
Yeah.
That you would buy your pew, you'd lease your pew. Yeah. He hated that. The Catholic churches did not allow that under the papal creeds. First come, first serve. If you were poor, you could still sit on the front row. So actually, Johnson loves the democratic spirit
of the Catholic Church.
And of course, it's very anti-Catholic at this time period. People hate Catholicism. I mean, of course, Kennedy will be the first Catholic president almost 100 years later.
Yep.
But you actually have Johnson takes up for Catholic candidates quite a bit, which maybe that's another nail in his coffin. Maybe that's the reason why he's hated. So, but religiously, he's just kind of all over the place. He likes the Catholics. He likes the Baptists. He goes Methodist. We don't really know what his personal relationship was, I guess, with Jesus, so to say. There's not a whole lot said about that or written about that.
No, there isn't at all. And I just find him to be a person who wasn't sure why he was there. Again,
that's good.
I find him
lack of purpose, maybe.
Yes, and struggling with that all throughout the rest of his life.
I think you started
defending his legacy.
You started talking about his daughter. His daughter takes over the role of the first lady. One of her most famous quotes. I came across this years ago in a biography, and I wrote it down. I've had it anytime I teach on the Preds. I thought this kind of sums up the Johnsons. We are plain people from the mountains of Tennessee, called here for a short time by national calamity. Plain people from the mountains of Tennessee, and that really summarizes the life of Andrew Johnson. He's not a scholar.
No.
He's not a military tactician. He's not an athlete. He's not really much of anything. He's just this average guy who liked to sew.
Yeah, exactly. He did like to sew, and he was a guy's guy. He was a commoner In fact, he was proud of being a commoner. The reason he supported staying, the reason he supported the Union against the secession is that it wasn't about slavery. It was about those rich elitists that were in the South. And he wasn't amongst them.
Drain the swamp?
Yeah, drain the swamp.
Drain the swamp.
And as it's a populist,
it is a populist ideal, which is interesting how populist candidates historically at the beginning were Republican. Well, we'll take that back. Populist candidates at the very beginning were Democrat with Jackson. They kind of transitioned to be Republican. They kind of transitioned back to be Democrat. And I think we're almost seeing the surge of the populist candidate going back to the Republican Party, maybe, to an extent.
Oh, yes.
So it's funny how that idea of the populist candidate of representing the backwoods everyday man, it's swung to different parties throughout American history.
Yes.
And I feel like we're kind of seeing it swing back to the Republican Party, maybe in a really large way in today's time.
And I think as a result of the 2016 election, I think that's where you brought back the populism to the Republican Party that they haven't seen in a very long time. And I think it persists again today. Does it make good politics? Well, we shall see.
Agreed. So you talked a lot about him in the Civil War. He was a military governor. One of his famous quotes when he was the military governor was, "I am no military man, but any man who retreats, I will personally shoot." Now, here's where it gets really dark, though, and I know you're probably familiar with this. In his time as the military governor of Tennessee, when Lincoln is still president, so we're backing up here, Johnson, as you said, is pro-slavery, although he's pro-union, so he's a weird,
that's the
weird
thing.
dude.
Yeah, that's why you can't reconcile this.
No, he is a, what was it that Reagan taught the Russians? They're a riddle wrapped in an enigma. That's Johnson, right? Johnson actually will keep Lincoln from giving the power of the Emancipation Proclamation over Tennessee. Tennessee is exempt from the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yes.
And it's one of the few states that is, because it was a southern state, it did succeed, but it was recaptured so soon, and now it's under Union control, that actually Johnson talks Lincoln into not allowing the Emancipation Proclamation to cover Tennessee, and then many slaves in Tennessee are the government pays their owners to use them to do Union work.
Isn't that amazing?
Which, you talk about sick. Here, you're fighting for the freedman.
There's no principle.
No, you're fighting to free individuals, and then you're using slaves to push forward your cause to free the individuals that you have enslaved to push your cause. Yeah. It is complete corruption all the way around.
Absolutely.
And you see Johnson already that he can't reconcile his principles, right? Which is what you've talked about.
Right.
So pro-union, pro-slavery, and they don't fit at all.
No.
They didn't fit in his presidency. They didn't fit in his governorship
but it
either.
accomplished his purpose of the day,
I often wonder to look at Johnson, was he just a survivalist? Was he just that poor kid still who was just, did he pick the Union side just because he thought they were going to win?
Yeah, probably so. But then again, he's against he's against the 14th Amendment. He's against the 15th Amendment, which gives suffrage to everybody.
Yes, imagine that.
Yeah, except for women, of course.
That won't happen until 1920, right?
Yeah, but we'll get to that. But you just can't reconcile this stuff. I mean, how can you be all the way over here one time and all the way over here the other time, and the two just conflict each other?
Yes, and you kind of tick off everybody in the process.
Yes.
By the end, the Democrats don't like him, the Republicans don't like nobody likes him by the end. That's the problem when you ride the fence.
Absolutely. You can't make everybody happy. No. You got to pick one side and stay with it.
Yes.
And ride that horse.
Stay with the girl you went to the dance with.
Exactly.
And Johnson didn't know how to do that. No. Now, the one shining, can we use the term shining on anything Johnson did, was he buys Alaska.
Yeah,
that's under his presidency.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. So it's 1867. He buys it from Russia. Russia, of course, has been tied up in the Crimean War. They've lost a ridiculous amount of money. So Russia sends surveyors to check out Alaska, and they come up with a price of $10 million is what the Russians say it's worth, which is just, I mean, what is that, a beach house in Florida now, right?
Exactly.
I mean, but they want to sell the whole. Now, America, because we're horse traders by nature, we talk them down to $7.2 million. And we buy Alaska for we even like less than 2 cents an acre. I don't know what it even breaks down to, but I mean, can you imagine? But
no.
$7.2 million. We buy all of Alaska. Now, there was a lot of talk of Britain buying Alaska, because Britain already owns Canada at this time period. But Russia doesn't like Britain at all. And surprisingly enough, Russia was good allies with us at this time period. Which, can you imagine? Russia wanted to be allies with us, but that's
not in today's world.
No, not at all. So they sell us Alaska for $7.2 million. Now, they call this Seward's Folly. Yeah. They call it Johnson's Icebox.
Yep.
And then gold's discovered.
Yep.
And then later, oil's discovered.
In the Yukon,
yes.
And all of a sudden, it's the 59th state.
Yeah, it was a brilliant idea, right? And I thought a lot about this, and I thought about
49th state.
49th state.
Yeah,
and then I thought a lot about Trump's desire to buy Greenland.
Yes.
When he was in office, and no matter what you think about Trump, I mean, he is a unique individual. that was actually a really smart move. Had he been able to purchase Greenland, the resources and the shipping lanes and the strategic layout was actually quite brilliant. And he was mocked for this. And I see the parallels of when Johnson bought Alaska, he was mocked for it. Then later the wisdom came out. Trump wants to buy Greenland, and he's mocked for this. But I think, had he bought it, had he been able to pull that off with Denmark, which Denmark didn't want to sell it, had he been able to pull that off, 50, 60 years from now, we'd be like, hey, we own the largest island.
Yes.
In North America, in the Western Hemisphere, right? And of course, at the same time period, China wanted to buy it, which would have been a direct violation of the Monroe Doctrine because they would have purchased land in the Western Hemisphere.
You're right.
Which technically, if you want to get really geographical here, it is an island off of North America. Although it's so large, you could really almost consider it a continent. It is an island off of North America. So China would have been able to purchase an island sitting off of the coast of North America. Can you imagine?
That would have been fascinating.
Yeah, just the geopolitical ramifications of all this playing out. So,
and there was a time, 100 years ago, 100-some years ago, 150 years ago, we were buying from countries.
Yes.
We were buying land from countries. So,
if you were here's a hypothetical question from your time in Congress. If you were the executive branch, if you were president, you had cash, countries were selling. What would be your ideal location to buy? Just globally, what would you think would help America the most? I would want to buy that location.
That's a good question. That's a very, very good question. That's hard to say because we need to have something in the South China Sea.
I agree with you there.
And whether that be Taiwan or I don't know, but we definitely need something in the South China Sea. And then I think Greenland,
I think Greenland was actually really smart.
I agree.
I'm not gonna lie, that was a really strategic location for shipping lanes in the North Atlantic, especially as most geopolitical scientists believe that the Arctic region is going to be the real contestant for war in future generations. Russia's laying claim to it. China's laying, I don't know how China lays claim to Antarctica. You're nowhere near it. We lay claim to it. Canada lays claim to it. Like, we're all laying claim to that region. That could be pardon the pun, the hotbed in the Antarctic of future wars. So had we owned Greenland, that would have made things really, really
strategically
different.
It would have been great.
Yes, it would have been. So Johnson, again, probably the only thing we can really say that he did well was the purchase of Alaska, right?
I agree.
He expands that. But his entire presidency is forever stained because of the impeachment. And also, because our listeners probably don't really understand, there's also something called presidential censor. Yeah. And this is used frequently. Was it used when you were in?
No.
Okay, I wasn't sure. Because I know it's been used a lot. Because even Lincoln gets censored.
Attempted, but never.
Would that be under George W. Bush?
No, this would have been under Obama.
Under Obama it was attempted, okay. Do you remember what it was for?
I do not.
I don't know if you could speak about that.
I don't know if it was with regard to Syria and the Red Line when Bashir al-Assad used chemical weapons, and we said that's a red line and did nothing about it. I know that there was a censure movement on that. We couldn't have done it because we didn't have control of the legislature.
I understand. So censors at this time period mean really nothing.
Right.
And here's what I always tell my class. If we keep treating impeachment where we impeach every president, before long, impeachment will mean nothing.
I think we're getting to that point.
Before long, the impeachment's going to be the same thing as censorship. Now, here's what I find really, really interesting. In an attempt to use impeachment more, you're going to degrade its power, and before long, the very thing you fear is you'll eventually maybe possibly have a tyrant because there's no true impeachment. Like the entire process of impeachment was to keep tyrants from coming to power.
And you've demeaned it so much, and you've diluted it so much, and you utilized it so much as a weapon that somebody could actually be guilty of it, and nobody would pay attention because we do it in every situation.
It's kind of like voter fraud. If there ever is voter fraud one day, no one's going to believe it because we have touted that on every election cycle for so long that if someone actually does commit voter fraud, we're going to be like, hey, there's voter fraud. And we'll be like, yeah, we've heard that before. Right? Yeah. It's kind of the whole mentality. It's desensification, right? Yes. It's the whole mentality that if every day is Christmas, no day is Christmas. And if we keep impeaching every president, it's not going to matter. So the very process of the founding intent was to have impeachment keep a tyrant from coming to power. Yeah. And now if a tyrant does come to power, we've lost the teeth of impeachment.
Absolutely. I hope we don't get there.
I agree with you on that. So as we look at this muddled life of Andrew Johnson, I don't really know how to conclude this on a bright note other than he purchased Alaska.
And we have a good president that follows.
We have a really good president that follows. Yeah. So next week you talk about Ulysses S. Grant. Powerful man, small man of conviction.
Oh, and perseverance.
Oh, my Lord. I always tell my students this, and I truly believe this. Everything, unless you're savant, everything you start at first, you're going to suck up at first, right? You're going to be horrible at it first. Like, you have to give yourself permission to fail.
Yes.
Everything I look back in my life and everything that I've been successful with at this state of my life, I was horrible at first.
Yes.
Most people, what I think defines great men versus just average men or mediocre men is that most great people just didn't quit.
Exactly.
That's literally all it is. They kept sucking, being made fun of, whatever it was. They just kept being bad at something long enough until they were mediocre at it, and they kept going. Maybe they were good at it, and maybe one day they could become great at it.
And they become the expert of it, yeah.
Exactly.
And respected for it.
Exactly. Johnson just didn't really have that. So next week, Ulysses S. Grant.
Look forward to it.
Me too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.